Okay, so in notes 10.3, we're going to be factoring polynomial functions, but we're also going to be graphing. Okay, so we're going to use division starting out. We're given a factor, and we're going to divide it using either synthetic or long division. And then you can factor that answer. From there, once it's factored, then we can start graphing it like we did on 10.1. Okay, so I'm just going to use long division on the first one, and then I'll use synthetic on the second one. So it doesn't really matter. Okay, so long, I have x minus 5, and then x cubed minus x squared minus 16x minus 20. Okay, so I'm going to divide it. So we'll get the first term and first term here. I need to multiply it by x squared. So I get x cubed minus 5x squared. And then remember, you have to subtract, so change the sign on both of those. So a negative x squared plus 5x squared would be 4x squared. And then minus 16x. So you're bringing down that next term. So look at the first terms again. I need to multiply by 4x. So that would be 4x squared. And that would be minus 20x. Subtracting both of them. So negative 16x plus 20x would give you 4x. And then bring down that last term, so minus 20. So 4x and x, I need to multiply by 4. That's 4x minus 20. And then we're subtracting. So we get 0 for the remainder. On all of these examples, you should not have a remainder. Okay? So we end up getting x squared plus 4x plus 4 for our answer. It wants us to factor the result. So 3 terms, we want to do sum and product. Sum would be 4, product would be 4. So that would be 2 and 2. Okay, so over here on this blank, go ahead and start your function, f of x equals. I have to include what I divided by, and then I will also include, there's 2 of them, so I could write squared, or you can write it as this. I'll accept either, but just know the squared there. Alright, so this part here is a review from 10.1. Now I'm going to find the roots. If I have a factor of x minus 5, the root would be 5. And then notice I have a double root at negative 2 because there's 2 of them. Overall, there's 3. So that should look like a cubic. And then looking in front, it's positive. So it should be increasing from left to right.
For letter jacket. Any student with a letter jacket packet who has not got size should be in the gym now. This is the last call for letter jackets. Any student needing to get size should be going to the big gym now.
Okay, so I have a root at 5. I have a double root at negative 2. If I need to increase from left to right, I need to start at the bottom on the left side. But remember, you have a double root at negative 2. So at negative 2, it should curve like a parabola, and then you can curve back to get to your single root. So we're having to divide, which we learned on 10.2. Then we're having to factor, which we learned a long time ago. Then we're using our roots to graph our polynomial function. Okay, 2. I'm going to use synthetic this time. So this is what I'm dividing by. I set that equal to 0, so the negative 2 would be our outside number. Remember, your coefficients go here. So 1, 5, 5, negative 5, negative 6. Notice we don't have a 0 because there's not anything missing. I need to bring down my coefficient. Negative 2 times 1, we get a negative 2. 5 plus a negative 2 is 3. Negative 2 times 6 is, or 3 is a negative 6, which adds to negative 1. Negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 2. Negative 5 plus 2 gives us a negative 3. Negative 2 times a negative 3 is a positive 6. So again, you should always get a remainder of 0 on these examples. So to the left of that is our constant, our x, x squared, and then x cubed. Alright, so we should have a 1x cubed plus 3x squared minus x minus 3. So once we divide, we are factoring. Notice here we have 4 terms. We learned when we have 4 terms, we factor by grouping. So I'm grouping these first 2 together. You're finding the GCF, which is x squared. You're left with x plus 3. Middle sign we always bring down. Notice they don't have anything in common, but we have to put a 1 there. And actually we're taking a negative 1 out, so we're dividing each one of those by negative 1, which would change it to positive x and positive 3. Remember, those have to match or you did something wrong with the grouping. This is not our answer. We write x plus 3 one time, and then we're grouping these together to get our other factor, x squared minus 1. Notice x squared minus 1 is difference of squares. So we can factor that to x plus 1, x minus 1. Okay, so when I'm writing my function, do not forget whatever you divided by, x plus 2. And then whatever we have left after we divided, which is x plus 3, x plus 1, and x minus 1. So roots, this part's a review from 10.1. X plus 2 would have a root at negative 2. X plus 3 would have a root at negative 3. X plus 1 would be negative 1, and x minus 1 would be positive 1. So overall, there's 4 roots, which means quartic. Notice in front, it's positive. So on quartic, it's just a parabola that opens up. So that a, whatever a is, which is the coefficient in front, that helps determine the direction of your graph. So I'm going to have a root at negative 2, negative 3, negative 1, and positive 1. Overall, it should be opening up. We don't have any double roots, so we're just going straight through each one and then curving back to get to the next root that we have. So if it was negative, it would have been opening down. Okay, looking at the back, we are actually doing less work than what we were doing on the front. The back, we don't have to divide because we're not given one of the factors. We're going straight to factoring, then we're sketching it. Okay, so first thing we always check for when we're factoring is GCF. Notice all of these have an x in common. Now, when you're factoring, if the very first term is negative, you need to take a negative out with your GCF. So I'm going to take a negative x out. Don't forget that. First term's negative, take a negative out. So I'm dividing each one by negative x. So I would be left with x cubed plus x squared minus 9x minus 9. Okay, so notice inside parentheses we have 4 terms. We just went over that. We're going to have to factor by grouping. The GCF of these first 2 would be x squared. You're left with x plus 1. Bring down your middle sign. The GCF of those would be 9, and we're actually taking a negative 9 because that first term was negative. So you're dividing each one of those by negative 9, which would leave you with x plus 1. Remember, those have to match. If they don't match, you did something wrong. That's not your answer. Remember, you have to go another step. X plus 1 is one of my factors. The other factor is grouping these is difference of squares. So we can go one more step. X squared minus 9 would factor to x plus 3 and x minus 3. Okay, so there's my function. Okay, roots. We talked about on 10.1, if we have a factor of x, the root is 0. X plus 1 would have a root at negative 1. X plus 3 would be negative 3. And x minus 3 would be positive 3. So there's a total of 4. And notice in front it's negative. So overall it should be opening down. So we have a root at 0, negative 1, negative 3, positive 3. Since I'm having to open down, I need to start at the bottom on the left side and go straight through each one and then curve back to get to the other. We don't have any double roots or triple roots on this one. So it just needs to go straight through your single root. Okay, last one. We're factoring. Oh, actually we have two more. We're factoring. So notice they all have an x in common. You're left with x squared plus 2x minus 8. Okay, so looking inside after we take out the GCF, there's 3 terms, which means we need to do sum and product. Sum would be 2, product would be negative 8. So that would be a positive 4 and a negative 2. That's as far as we can go with factoring. So that's our factored function there. Roots. We just went over it. If we just have an x as a factor, the root is 0. X plus 4 would be negative 4. X minus 2 would be positive 2. So overall there's 3. And it's positive. So it should increase from left to right. So root at 0. Root at negative 4. And positive 2. So if I need to increase from left to right, I start at the bottom on the left side and go straight through each one. Okay, now the last one. Remember, GCF first. Notice here, first term is negative, we need to take it out. GCF of those two would be x squared, but we're taking a negative x squared out because the first term is negative. So I'm left with, when I divide it by negative x squared, we're left with x minus 4. Okay, and notice I can't factor x minus 4. If it was x squared minus 4, we could, but it's just x minus 4. So there's my function. Okay, notice we have an x squared, which means we have 2 x's. If we have 1 x, we know the root is 0. So if it's x squared, there's a double root at 0. X minus 4 would have a root at 4. So there's 3 overall. Notice in front, it's negative. So it should be decreasing from left to right. Double root at 0 and a single root at 4. Now remember, double roots should curve like a parabola. So I need to be starting above because I'm decreasing from left to right. So as I get to the double root at 0, I curve it and then curve it back to get to your single root. Okay, so this is just putting everything together in order to graph your polynomial function. So we're having to factor it. On 10.1, it was already factored for us. We just graphed it. So now we're having to factor, and then on the front we had to divide.